In the dead of night, the forest was alive with whispers, branches cracking, heavy footsteps chasing shadows, and the ragged sound of someone running for their life. A woman's breath hitched as she stumbled over roots, her clothes torn, fear flashing in her wide eyes. She glanced behind her, heart pounding, as dark figures closed in. She knew they wanted her silenced. She knew she wouldn't make it out alive. But fate had other plans. From the shadows stepped a man, broad-shouldered, rugged, his presence commanding as though the forest itself obeyed him. His voice was calm, steady, almost too steady for the chaos around them. "Stay behind me," he said. The woman didn't even have time to ask who he was before he moved, swift, precise, dangerous. In seconds, the hunters who had been chasing her lay disarmed, retreating like wolves realizing they'd crossed paths with a lion. The woman's knees buckled, and she clutched her chest. Who are you?" she whispered. The man simply turned, moonlight catching his scarred jawline, his eyes dark with secrets. "Just a single dad trying to keep his boy safe," he said. But that wasn't the truth. Not all of it. His name was Daniel Cross. To the small mountain town of Ashridge, he was nothing more than a quiet mechanic who kept to himself, raising his 8-year-old son, Noah. Parents saw him every morning, walking Noah to school, lunchbox in hand, with a gentle smile that hid storms behind it. To his neighbors, Daniel was the kind of man who fixed a broken tractor without charging a dime, the kind of father who showed up for every school play, clapping the loudest. No one knew his past. No one dared ask. For years, Daniel had built a quiet life in Ashridge, trying to shield Noah from the ghosts that haunted him. The forest was his refuge, the one place he could breathe without being reminded of what he once was. But that night, when the woman ran straight into him, his carefully built walls began to crumble. Her name was Emily Hart, a journalist from the city. She'd come chasing a story about corruption, never realizing she'd dug too deep. Someone wanted her dead, and they had chased her into the wilderness to finish the job. But instead of death, she found Daniel. The next morning, Emily awoke in Daniel's cabin. The scent of wood smoke filled the air, and Noah sat across the table, eating cereal, watching her with curious eyes. Daniel brewed coffee silently, his every movement sharp and efficient, as if he'd been trained for far more than fixing cars. "You should leave," Daniel said flatly. "The men chasing you, they won't stop. Staying here puts Noah in danger." Emily's throat tightened. She knew he was right. But when she met his eyes, she saw something else. Something unspoken. He wasn't just trying to protect his son. He was protecting himself, from whatever darkness lived inside him. "Why did you help me, then?" she asked. Daniel paused, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "Because once, someone didn't help. And I swore I'd never make that mistake again." Days passed, and Emily should have left. But her car was wrecked, the roads were unsafe, and her pursuers were closer than ever. Reluctantly, Daniel allowed her to stay, though his cabin became less a sanctuary and more a battlefield of emotions. Emily watched how Daniel loved Noah, teaching him how to fish, helping with homework, tucking him into bed with a gentleness that melted the rough edges of his demeanor. She saw a father who carried the world on his shoulders, who smiled for his son but never for himself. At night, when Noah slept, Emily would sit by the fire with Daniel. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words carried weight. Slowly, the truth slipped through. He wasn't always a mechanic. Once, he was someone else. A soldier. A protector. A man trained to do things he wished he could forget. And then came the mission that broke him, the mission that cost his wife her life. "I walked away from everything after that," Daniel admitted one night, his voice rough as the fire crackled between them. "All I had left was Noah. So I became someone else. Someone simple. Someone safe. But men like me, We don't get to stay safe, do we? Emily's eyes softened, her own pain echoing in his words. She, too, had spent years chasing truth, believing justice was worth any price. But now, as the hunters closed in again, she realized the truth wasn't always what mattered most. Sometimes, survival was. The storm finally broke when the men found the cabin. It was a night of thunder and rain. Noah was asleep upstairs when headlights cut through the trees. Emily froze, panic flooding her veins. But Daniel didn't panic. He moved with calm precision, retrieving weapons no mechanic should have owned. Emily's breath caught. You said you left that life behind. Daniel's eyes burned with a fierce protectiveness. I lied. What followed was chaos, gunfire tearing through the night, shouts echoing in the rain. Daniel moved like a shadow, every strike calculated, every step controlled. He was no longer just a father. He was a warrior, fighting for the only thing that mattered, his son's safety. When it was over, the hunters lay broken in the mud. Rain washed the blood away. Daniel stood in the wreckage, chest heaving, while Emily stared at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. You saved me, she whispered. He shook his head, glancing toward the cabin where Noah slept. I saved him. Everything I do is for him. But Emily saw the truth in his eyes. He had saved her, too. Not just from death, but from hopelessness. Morning came. The forest was quiet again, as though it had swallowed the violence whole. Emily packed her things, ready to return to the city. But when she looked at Daniel, at Noah's smile as he clung to his father's hand, she realized leaving wouldn't be so simple. You don't have to keep running from your past, she said softly. Maybe it's time you stopped being a ghost. Maybe it's time you started living again. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then at his son, then at the sunlight breaking through the trees. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. And so, the single dad who once buried his past began to live again, through courage, through love, through the bond of a boy who gave him purpose and a woman who reminded him he was more than his scars. Because sometimes, the strongest hearts are the ones that have been broken, and rebuilt. And sometimes, a secret past isn't a curse. It's the reason you can save someone else's future.